IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde says the global economy is in a very fragile state. She made the comments during a conversation with Yahoo Finance's Miles Udlin, and he joins us once again from D.C. So, Miles, what other topics did you touch on today?
Yeah, outside of the headlines that we've gone through a few different times here at Yahoo Finance, we also extended our conversation and talked about a couple of interesting areas. I think Brian Chung might like one of these, and it's digital currencies that central banks might issue. We also talked about regulating some of the biggest tech companies in the world. Take a listen.
It's actually happening. When you look at the Caribbean islands and the Caribbean central banks and the Bahamas, actually, you have, I believe, 4 or 5 islands which together have decided at central bank level to go with a digital currency. So central bank digital currency is coming alive. It's not going to happen today. I think they have a 12-month experimental period that they want to go through before they actually launch for good.
And how much at the IMF are you thinking about the next 70 years of the global economy, specifically on issues like climate change, which you mentioned today as an overhang on where this whole project might be headed?
Well, I think, some of those global issues, like climate change, like corruption, are issues of general interest, and particularly for young people. So while we've served the international community for 75 years, we need to look at what is going to interest and motivate those who will be 75 years in 75 years. So looking at young people, what is of concern to them is, in my view, really important. We do not want to venture in areas that we have no competence in. But clearly, the fiscal impact of climate change-related policies is critically important. You're talking about, $5.2 trillion, which is huge. It's almost 6% of global GDP. So we need to look at those numbers. This is our business. This is what we are mandated to do, to see where the revenues come from, where the spending is, whether the fiscal position is in a good place and provides a good equilibrium. So climate change is vitally important. Corruption is also extremely important. And the research that we will be releasing in a few days demonstrates very clearly that corruption is a brake on growth. Corruption is a brake on employment. Corruption deteriorates confidence.
When you talked about the winners take most economy, and it's sort of an interesting thing because most conventional measures have said things have gotten better, right? It's not all bad, but it does feel like these companies are contributing to an increasing amount of economic inequality. And so is there a role for a more international organization like the IMF to step in and have conversations with a company like Facebook or an Amazon about how they can, maybe be better global citizens or maybe make the global situation more fair? And you also talked about changes in corporate taxation that could come along with that.
I think they come together, you're right. And I also believe that there is an awareness of what's happening. And that would be very welcome, because I believe that all things have to take place in coordination. You don't just go and impose rules without having debated them and consulted and checked the direct impact and the indirect consequences. But clearly in the area of market power, you do see, and that's research that will be released in the next few days as well, but you see a group of large, dynamic companies that do have the benefit of that winner takes most that you've described. And it's not creating a huge problem for the moment, but it's heading in that direction. So I think we all need to be extremely aware and cautious about it, and we need to frame those policies, look at competition rules, look at barriers to entry, look at how some of those large companies gobble up little shoots that are trying to also make a name for themselves. All that needs to be addressed so that we do not have those global monopolies that really are not conducive to a large share of income going to employees as we have seen.
And of course, those companies have fewer employees with more output than a manufacturing company. Now, over the weekend, Mark Zuckerberg put out an op-ed basically saying, inviting regulation. I think it was met with quite a bit of cynicism here in the US, but is that the kind of thing that you think we need to see? We need to see global executives coming out and saying, we want to be a part of the process. I mean, does that seem to you like the best solution for figuring out how these companies fit into the world, again, that we're talking about where do we go for the next 75 years?
Well, let's hope it is genuine, because as I said, coordination is needed, cooperation of all actors will be conducive to something that works rather than something that on paper works and will be avoided and schemed around by the corporate sector. But I think, truth of the pudding is in the eating.
Right.
Let's see if those companies with that growing market power are genuine about it. It's probably because they have a vested interest in setting out the framework within which they can operate and avoiding the negative consequences of somebody else suddenly realizing that they are a problem and need to be addressed without much cooperation.
Look, maybe I'm just cynical and I don't think the IMF is going to change and really address climate change, or I'm surprised to hear them talk about Facebook's power. Now, they come short of saying it's monopoly power, but certainly there are dynamics in the global economy that we hear from a lot of politicians, certainly on the left here in the US and also abroad, that the IMF seems at least sympathetic to or that they're exploring. And so outside of the usual, oh, here's how the global economy is going to grow, I think some really interesting comments from Christine Lagarde about where the fund sees its research and its work going in the coming decades.
Great questions. Miles Udland in D.C. We'll check back in with you shortly.